Hi.
Hi.
I'm Sydney.
Christin.
Kaitlyn.
And we're going to talk about our readings.
So we're going to start off with Sue and Sue, Chapter 25, Counseling Individuals Living in Poverty.
So one quote that I thought was interesting was, and I'll just read it, if you don't have a roof over your head, if you don't have your electric bill paid, then how are you going to take care of your mental health? And that kind of stood out to me because you want to take care of your basic necessities first, and I could see why someone would not want to take the time to take care of mental health when they have more pressing, when am I going to eat, and where am I going to get access? So I thought that was interesting and a good point.
Yeah, I feel like it's also, if people are struggling financially, mental health services are generally pretty expensive. So I would assume that plays a huge role in that too. Besides, I know some counselors do sliding scales or pro bono services, but I would imagine a lot of people living in poverty aren't really aware of those certain opportunities or services.
Yeah, and then it was also talking about how people living in poverty don't seek treatment because of practical problems like limited transportation, inflexible work schedules, and lack of health insurance. And I feel like that's a big thing because, I knew people in college who didn't have health insurance, and they were like, no, I can't go to the doctor for that, but at least they had the college, health center that they could go to and stuff like that. But it's if you get in a car accident, break your bone, you have to go, and then, you're gonna have to find a way to pay for that, whether you can or can't. So, I don't know. And then, work schedules. I feel you couldn't even take your kid if you really needed to because you have to go to work because it's more important to keep your job than to get, fired because you had to take, a day off and they're not going to allow you to.
I thought it was interesting that they brought up, stereotypes such as, being seen as lazy, dysfunctional, or drug addicted. I thought that was really interesting because I could just imagine that they, would feel burden, that they're a burden on society, and which I feel that also contributes to, even more mental health issues. So I think it's just really sad that people are making assumptions and, they don't know anything about their lives,
Yeah. I had a thought.
It was, part of it was talking about how the poor are basically and metaphorically being excluded from mainstream culture life because of, civic ordinances restricting where it is to sleep or, lay in, cities. So even then, when they're forced to move around like that and not stay in one spot, they can lose, they said, medications, personal documents, and other property, which just leads to them being even worse off in the long run.
Yeah, as I was reading this chapter, I just kept thinking of the isolation aspect of living in poverty and, like you said, being forced to move, you already don't have shelter and you're being forced to move to a different city or a different area and having not really anybody and the way that society views you. For counselors, I feel it's important that we don't buy into those stereotypes.
I agree. And I even, another part that kind of stood out was, driving homeless people away from certain cities. You kind of mentioned, both of you mentioned that. I kind of saw that as, oh, we're just going to ship you somewhere else. You're someone else's problem. And it's just really sad and, heartbreaking to hear that.
I thought it was interesting that children are the most likely age group to live in poverty at 19.9%. And that child poverty in the United States is one of the highest in the developed world. And how?
Yeah.
I didn't think it would be kids that would be mostly affected by that. But I'm just, also confused as to why it's kids.
Yeah, I wrote down a quote. It said, globally, one of the distinguishing features of American poverty is that it takes place in the wealthiest nation in the world. The U.S. continues to have one of the world's most unequal income distributions, which also, like, surprised me because, you know, it kind of buys into, like, America's the land of opportunity, you know, the American dream, and it's like these statistics don't really show that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I thought it was obvious that women are more likely to live in poverty than men because we make less, it's like 77 cents to every dollar they make or something like that.
Yeah.
But, like, I thought just looking at the percentages that they give for, like, women of color, like, black women is the highest at 25.3% in poverty. And then for white women, it's 10.7%. So it, like, drops by over half, but you still have women being more in poverty than men. And I think it's bullshit.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say something that kind of stood out to me was the quote, living in poverty for any significant length of time increases all sorts of risk factors for health and mental health problems. And that just kind of shows you, like, even if it's, like, a short amount of time or a longer period, like, it still, like, impacts a person. And, I don't know, that just kind of, I thought that was just interesting to read. What do you guys think?
Going, like, off of that, what was written after it was, like, poverty is related to and often precedes the development of emotional problems such as anxiety and depression. And I feel like it's obvious that people could easily get anxiety and depression from it because, like, when you're put in a situation like that, how could you not have anxiety or depression about where you are in life or, like, not being able to get the things you need to even live? So, but then it, like, went on, I don't know where I wrote it, to, like, list, like, all of the things that you could get, like, physical and mental illnesses.
Oh, like the heart disease, diabetes, exposure to
Yeah.
toxins. Like, there was just so many. It even talked about just, like, earlier, too, that I found was, like living in, like, pollution and, like, increased risk of, like, asthma and just, like, I don't know, it's just really sad to think that, like, there's so many other, like, factors. You already got, like, worrying about, like, having, like, access to food and getting all you're like, having your things together because you never know where you might get shipped away, like we mentioned earlier. And then now, like, there's other factors going on, such as, like, pollution outside, like, affecting your lungs. Like, I don't know, I thought that was just interesting.
Yeah, and then, like, people who have, like, lower incomes or get paid, like, minimum wage who are working in, like, these, like, factories or near, like, plants and things like that are getting, like, all of this pollution, and then they're getting sick because of it, but they don't have the money or the insurance to then get, like, health care for it, and then it's just, like, a cycle that keeps continuing.
Yeah, I was just going to say the unpredictability and, like, trauma that they must face every day is pretty unimaginable for me. I just can't imagine, like, not knowing where you'll be tomorrow or where you're going to eat next, what you're going to eat, where you're going to sleep. Those are just things that I feel like we kind of take for granted. We don't even think about them, you know?
Yeah. And then it was, like, talking about how education is often promoted as a pathway out of poverty, but that's really not the truth. Because, like, I think about going to college and, like, how much does it cost to go to college and then graduate school, and it's, like, I don't know, a lot of kids, like, a lot of people are just going to be in debt after that, and they're going to spend their whole entire lives paying it off because they're not making enough in the job that they get out of college. But we're making it like necessary in society to even get like basically a minimum wage job. You have to either be in college or be graduated for it. Now it's like a requirement, and it's like, are you kidding me? Like, what?
Seems like the standards keep getting higher and higher for job competitiveness, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
And then I was talking about how test scores, the gap between students and from like upper income students and lower income families has increased by 40% since the 1960s, and 22% of those from low income families do not graduate from high school as compared to the 6% of those from higher income families. I thought it was just like a test score like gap of that much is like pretty like drastic. And then I mean, I understand it if you're not like, if you don't have like a home to stay at, or if you're not getting food, like you can't think, or like your last thought is probably focusing on school or doing like homework or studying for a test. So like I can see how your grades could easily drop, but yeah.
Well, it even mentioned the quote that I have is, children who attend like public schools in poor communities are more likely to be taught by poorly paid teachers, like few computers, few resources, fewer classes, fewer extracurricular opportunities, and even having fewer teachers than like students who have like than those attending by like wealthier students. So like just having access even at a younger age to the opportunities of like just, I mean, think about it, like when I was little, like I had computers, like that was never an issue, and like it's sad to think that like little things like computers or having library books are not even like accessible, and it's just like they don't even have like the foundation to even start. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when it was talking about the criminal justice system and how it's like really classist, and it portrays like crimes as misdeeds of the poor. So like it focuses on street crimes, and that's what police like typically like what their arrest rate and criminal rate statistics are mostly focused on. And then this practice serves to deflect attention from the crimes that actually cause the most death and destruction, like crimes that derive from the actions of people with social class privilege, like corporate fraud and toxic pollutants and risky high-level financial ventures. So I don't know. I was just like thinking like that because I think it's in one of the other chapters somewhere where it talks about how that one bank from like a while ago got. I'll talk about it later. You just wait. Don't have those notes in front of me.
One thing that I thought was kind of interesting was, do you remember when they were talking about like the cookies and like where you had to bring in cookies for the kid? Do you guys remember that? Like where they like the kid was supposed to bring in cookies for class, like homemade, and like they couldn't afford to get all the natural ingredients, so they ended up doing like Oreos. And that's just, I mean, think about it like throughout your childhood, like you're like in elementary school and beyond, like there's always like bring something in, but like has to be homemade, and like just something simple like that could be like so detrimental like on a family, because like they're trying to focus on like getting substantial meals, not like making cookies for like the whole class, you know?
Yeah.
So even that small example like that, I thought that was interesting.
Do you guys want to move on to Rothenberg?
I guess it's that time.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have anything else to say.
Yeah. So we're doing Rothenberg now. Alright.
interesting that a study found that fewer than 1 in 5 men will surpass the economic status of their fathers.
Wow.
I thought that was like really interesting because I would have thought that more to be so true towards really wealthy families, but even then you inherit like your dad's money most likely. So I thought that was interesting to hear because I feel like not that many people are in highly paid positions to where all these people who are now going to school couldn't get a job that's getting paid more because they should have. It's more likely that sons are now going to college and stuff like that, so why can't they surpass the economic status of their dads?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I liked how in this chapter it showed, or it had different examples of people, and it said they were all hardworking and motivated. It had an example of 2 white males and a black female, and this kind of just demonstrated to me the contrast to, like I said before, the American dream and how if you persevere and work hard, you can achieve anything. Kind of made me think of that video we watched a couple weeks ago. I forget what it was called. America to Me, that one. But yeah, the difference in incomes was crazy to me to look at in the table.
Yeah. It was interesting to just read, like you were mentioning, like each of the little like stories of people, I guess.
Yeah.
Like it was just little things like if they got supplement like education, whether or not like for Harold Browning, he was one of the ones that had like more financial safety, I guess. Like he had a private SAT tutor, while Bob Farrell, like he had like just an SAT prep course offered by the national chain. Like there's just a huge difference. Like he got a BMW as his graduation gift, and then the other one got $500. Like, you know what I mean? Like, which $500, that's great. But
that's
like
so
a
good.
but like a BMW, like that's such a huge difference. And then like Cheryl Mitchell, like it was just like this made me like this was shocking. Like Harold Browning spends more money on his horses than she makes in a year, which she made $17,850 roughly. He spent more on his horses than she'll ever make, which is that's just heartbreaking to hear. And like then she couldn't like, or she wasn't even able to get any supplementary education, and she ended up having to drop out because of financial reasons. So all these 30 people's lives, just it's so different, and like even their achievements too, like or like ambitions, what they wanted. I thought that was really interesting. I actually really appreciated having it because it was more like you could see a person and like you can, I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Here's my fraud case.
We're back.
Told you I'd come back with it. But yeah, like so examples of the government fining for environmental violations and establishing regulations that protect consumers and workers, like the
bank?
Oh, yeah, but like what was I saying that tied into it from the other chapter? I don't know, but just how more crimes are just like petty crimes that people are getting accused for, and then you have big corporations or banks. And the example I was talking about was when the federal government concluded a fraud case against the Goldman Sachs investment bank, and they had to pay $550 million, but that was less than 4% of what the bank paid its executives and the bonuses that year. So it's like, what kind of punishment are they actually getting? Like, they want the outside world to view them as getting, like, a punishment, but to them it's only a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have people going to prison for, like, doing petty crimes 3 times in a row, and like, that's it. So It's a little unfair. And then most of the time it's people of color who are going to prison for those types of crimes.
Right.
For marijuana.
Yeah.
That's now legal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. This chapter just really highlighted how your class affects so many different areas of life.
Mm-hmm.
Besides just like your social status or whatever. I wrote down a quote. It said, class affects life expectancy. The lower a person's class standing is, the more difficult it is to secure housing. The more time is spent on the routine tasks of life, the greater is the percentage of income that goes to pay for food, healthcare, and other basic necessities. And the greater is the likelihood of crime victimization. So that just kind of shows, like, it's kind of like an umbrella, I feel like, of things that class affects.
Right. I thought it was interesting. There was a quote that says, "As individuals, we feel hurt and angry when someone is treating us unfairly, yet as a society, we tolerate, like, this, like, injustice."
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad because, like, that is such a reality, like, and I don't know, I just thought that was, like, really interesting because on an individual level, like, if someone hurt us, like, or if we're getting treated unfairly, like, I don't know if we voice it, but, like, we're not, as a society, like, voicing it really
up.
We're, like, trying to advocate.
This comes to being an ally.
Yeah.
We're not speaking up.
Yeah.
As a society.
Yeah.
Only when it, like, affects us directly.
Exactly.
Which is not fair.
Right. Sad.
I thought it was, like, I already knew this, but I thought it was still interesting to, like, read it, that under capitalism, like, enterprises that are governed by the need to provide a profit for just the owners rather than to fulfill societal needs. Like, with capitalism, like, one person is just getting, like, all of this income, and then everyone else is just, like, not getting any money whatsoever and living in poverty, and, like, the money that one person makes could help, like, countless people's lives that are, like, working under that person. And, like, what are they even doing with all that money?
I don't know.
But then that, like, comes into question, like, if you were one of those people, like, making all that money, like, would you really, like, how much of it would you, like, donate to help with certain causes? Or would you be like, well, I'm up here now.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
which, like, I know a lot of people do donate, but, like, that's all on the person, though. Like,
Yeah.
like, if I'm, like, if I had that money, it's like, okay, I choose to do, you know what I mean? Like,
I think
it just depends on the person.
Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie?
Yeah.
He does not donate.
Yeah. But he easily could, but
yeah. No,
since
there's
he
a
has
lot
that
of
power it goes
athletes that do donate to certain causes. It's
Yeah.
obviously not enough, but
right.
I saw this, for example, I think it was Jay-Z set up a trust fund for the kids of that one rapper who was murdered this, like, past week.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know what you're
Hustle.
talking about.
what was his name?
Like, Hustle.
Nipsey Hussle?
Or, yeah, something
Yeah,
like
Something.
that.
Yeah.
And he, like, set it up, and there's, like, $30 million in it or something that he, like, set up for them. And I was like, I mean, like, they, like, lost their father. Like, I understand that, but then that's also just, like, making sure that someone who was, like, wealthy, like, that their kids also stay wealthy. And so, like, you know, like, it was just like, oh, well, and there's, like, so many kids who go through the same thing, but because that was their dad,
Yeah.
they're getting this.
Or kids who are, like, living in poverty.
Yeah, but there's kids who are living on the street.
Don't have security. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting because they do get to donate it to whoever they want. It's their money, but it's just interesting to look at.
I wrote down a quote that I I related to. It said, imagine a country where wages have fallen despite greatly increased education. Obviously, being a graduate student, I think of the increased education part. And it's just like, how are the wages falling if we're going into even more student debt? Like, is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? Am I going to be in debt until I'm 50? It was just very, I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah.
Are we going into like all of his chapters?
That was on page 327 to 337. Sorry, did I jump ahead?
Oh, no, I was just wondering if I could like go on to his other chapters.
Yeah,
Go on.
Go for it.
Kind of to go up, I know this is kind of like reiterating, but like just hearing the numbers was just shocking. Like, like in, it said in 1980, the CEO made an average of 45 times the pay of the average full-time worker. In 1991, CEOs made 140 times as much as workers. And in 2011, CEOs made 259 times. Like, that is, it's like, what? And then obviously it's gone up because it's 2019, so it's easily has gone up. Yeah. And like, it's just sad to hear all that, and then hear like there are people living like off of like 2 paychecks and like struggling to afford like a house and like food. So that was just hearing the stats is just really like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think
real. Yeah, like I couldn't even figure out a word. Well, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you're good. I was just gonna say that I work at Starbucks, so I think of like, if the CEO of Starbucks could just raise my wage a little bit, we could all do so much better. Right. If he would just sacrifice a little bit of his however many $1 million salary a year.
I thought it was interesting when, I think it's like chapter 7, Unequal Childhoods, and it was talking about how concerted cultivation, so making sure that like middle class families are making sure like their children have all these certain experiences, but then that ends up giving them a sense of entitlement, and that sense of entitlement now is really important to have going into like institutions like schools and everything, because like all of those kids are like bargaining with their teachers or like using those things to help advantage them because their parents have taught them to be that way. But then you have the lower class parents who are worrying only about like food, health, and clothing, and not extracurricular activities for their kids. And they don't consider these concrete developmental like things that need to go on in a child's life to help them get to the stage that the middle class families are having their kids get to by giving them all these experiences. And instead they like set clear boundaries between their kids and adults, and they use like directives, so they like tell kids what to do instead of like persuading them to do it or anything like that. And I feel like, what do they say this? They like focus more on accomplishment of natural growth more so than the middle class families. So the working class and poor families' parenting styles are out of date with the standards of institutions. So middle class kids have a sense of entitlement, while lower class gain distance and distrust in institutional settings. So I thought that was just like really interesting to hear that that's how like the differences are like in really like young school settings, like in kindergarten and like elementary school or like middle school, having like, I don't know, at the school I work at, I can like kind of see those differences. You have the kids that are like outspoken and they like look at you more as an equal, and it's like, no, like you, like to a certain extent I like the way that lower class kids are raised, because in a sense they still have like a certain amount of respect for older people, but like middle class kids have such a strong like sense of entitlement that they don't have that respect anymore. So it's like, I guess, like a give and take. Like, you empower these kids, but then they just take it and run, and they're like, oh, well, like, I can say this and do that, and you can't do anything about it. Like, what are you going to do? And it's like, sure, like, they can stand up for themselves, but is that actually going to help them in the future with getting, like, a job or, like, interviews if they have that sense of, like, themselves, like, they're better than everyone? I don't know. I feel like even though like poor families like don't have that type of like, they don't raise kids that like are entitled in that type of way, like in that school setting I would much rather work with those kids because they don't talk back to you and they listen to you, and in the long run they're getting more out of it because they're not sitting there arguing with you. I don't know, that was like my stance on it.
Yeah, I feel like it's also a matter of like different cultures too, because a lot of cultures, we kind of talked about it last week, but they stress more like respecting your elders and respecting authority and that sort of thing. So maybe that's also seen in like kids are taught, you know, to respect their parents and not show that sense of entitlement that you were talking about. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I thought of the example of like looking people in the eyes. So like middle class children like are taught like you need to like look people in the eyes, while like in poor families it mentions that they don't look each other in the eye because it actually could be dangerous to look someone in the eye for too long. And so that just kind of shows, like, the different worlds that they're, like, living in. Like, to think that it's, like, dangerous just to look at someone for too long, like, obviously it's, like, a safety thing then. Like, okay, I'm not going to do this. When later on, when middle-class kids, like, they'll go into a job interview and look the person in the eye and get the job versus someone who wasn't taught that because they're like, oh, no, it's for my safety not to do that. So that's just, like, another example of, like, unequal opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to like that, we talked about it in the first Sue and Sue, how like just meeting those basic needs of like safety, how that's their focus, whereas people who are more privileged and higher class, they, you know, that's not a huge concern to them. It's not like at the forefront of their mind. And it's not fair because if they're both qualified for a job, you know.
Let's see. Oh, I found something that was kind of interesting. This was the page 327 to 337, like Imagine a Country. I thought it was really, I think this is very true, where like kids are expected to have 3 parents, like 2 parents that have a job and then another parent to be there in the afternoon while they're like done with school or like summer. And that's why I feel like, I even feel like a lot of parents do that now, like especially in this area, but people in like Moraga and Orinda most likely have resources to hire like a babysitter to come, a nanny to come in. But I'm just thinking of like other communities, like they can't afford to have someone there. So it's 3 parents, like, I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting that, like, just to get by, I mean, the 2 parents, are, like, they have to work and they have to be at their jobs just to support their family.
I thought it was interesting that, like, we're ranked first in the world for wealth and military power, but 48th in infant mortality. It's like, where is our money going? Like, towards certain causes and then not helping, like, infants dying. Like, I mean, I don't know. Just, like, be in that type of power, what we're, like, sacrificing or, like, I don't know. And then it said, like, we're just only right in front of, like, Cuba and South Korea on that, and it's like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, we have way more, like, money and means to, like, focus on that problem than other countries, but yet we're still in that same category as them on that.
That kind of made me think about, I kind of mentioned this earlier too, but this part, I was just like, wow. So, like, they mentioned, like, rich schools, they have, like, modern libraries, like, computers, and, like, their schools look like a country club.
Yep.
And then poor, like, schools, like, they have to ration out, like, textbooks and needs, like, toilet paper. Like, and then the reading mentioned that it's, like, the school looks like a jail. And, like, that is just a huge difference. And, like, a country club, like, it's all, like, fancy. And, like, a jail, like, that just doesn't sound like a place that...
Kids don't want to go there.
Yeah, and get
It
your
looks
education,
like
like,
a jail.
learning, yeah. It's sad. It's sad to think that. Different realities.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting that, like, wages have fallen despite great increase in education.
Yeah.
So, like, why, if more people are going to college and getting, like, higher education, why are we all getting paid less? Because we're, like, putting the money into the system. So why isn't it coming back to us in the long run? And it's just, like, I don't know, they're getting so much of our money, and then they're like, oh, well, like, if we pay them less, we can have even more money.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the point of school?
It's a great question. Here we are.
I thought it was interesting on page 334, it mentions how, like there's full prisons instead of, like, full employment. And, like, the fact that it is quadrupled since 1980, and, like, it's in 1980, 1 in every 453 residents are in prison, and then in 2010 it says now 1 in every 137. Like, it's still a huge problem, and, like, it even mentioned, like, it costs, like, $29,000 to keep someone in prison. And I don't know, I just thought that was insane, instead of, like, trying to find ways to, like, employ people who have maybe done a crime in the past and help them. I feel like they just end up getting stuck in prison.
Yeah, it's certainly not rehabilitative.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a cycle, I feel like. Go to prison, get out of prison, get put back.
Yeah, we actually talked about it in my psychopathology class about how, like, now that that's on your record, it's hard to get
a job.
Yeah.
How do you
So
improve?
Then it like you said, it's like the cycle. It just keeps happening because, I mean, how can you get a job if you have that on your record? Sad.
Going back to what I was talking about with the infant mortality, it said, I thought this was just, like, a really, like, interesting way of phrasing it. They're like, if the government was a parent, it would be guilty of child abuse. And I thought that was, like, really interesting, especially because of what's, like, going on in society with, like, the government trying to control, like, women's rights around abortion and, like, birth control and all of that. And it's, like, you could argue that, like, hey, there's so many, like, babies dying here, but yet you're forcing me to have this pregnancy and not giving me an option of getting rid of it when something, like, even worse could happen in the future. So it's, like, maybe they should focus on fixing that problem before they, like, implement themselves into women's lives.
Yeah. We're done with...
We still have,
we may come back.
the feminism and the masculinity part. Okay.
Do you want to do a masculinity? Or did you have something in the feminism you wanted to do?
I thought we had a touch on all of them.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay.
My bad. Let's see.
I thought it was interesting in the masculinity part that when they were listing all of the attitudes and behaviors that boys don't learn, like being supportive and nurturing and accepting, and they don't ask for like help or anything like that, and that they don't value women or women's work, and that they don't like empower other people or resolve conflicts in like non-aggressive ways. And I was like, what are we raising? Like a bunch of psychopaths? No wonder they go around like murdering everyone.
Yeah.
They're not like raised with common respect. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like what do we expect them to act like when they're older, when they're being raised to like believe and think these ways?
Yeah, the part that kind of stood out to me was when I think, like, the author, I guess, like, told one of the kids, like, oh, you're a fag because you're wearing pink shorts, trying to, like, see, like, his, like, reaction, and he literally said, I'm going to kill you. And, like, just for, like, a name, like, a simple, like, word, and having that much, like, you needed to, like, defend and, like, protect yourself from just being called a name like that. It's just, that's sad to me. And like the amount of violence too, like that's terrible.
I thought it was like interesting when they were asking the question of if you woke up the opposite sex, like what would you do or how would you feel? And like women like easily replied that like life would be a lot easier because of like advantages. Mm-hmm. And then the men expressed like disgust and refused to even answer the question sometimes. Yeah. And it's like,
even
I'm not that bad.
We gave you life.
Well, like, yeah, and making stuff like if I was a girl, I would kill myself. Like that's again,
scary.
Like that's just sad to think everything would be miserable. Like,
yeah,
really?
Yeah, and then it like makes you think like, oh, that's like why they treat women the way they do, because like literally they would want to kill themselves if they were us. Like, yeah, I don't know, the lack of respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's that that sense of hyper masculinity and like don't want to be a sissy, don't want to be weak, don't want to be seen as like a girl or whatever, and they're taught that from birth, so it's just kind of a system that's so ingrained. But yeah, reading that was like, seriously.
And like it just was interesting that like there's so many settings where like they have to, or they feel like they have to dominate in. Like it mentions like in their sexual relationship, family, the streets, the battlefield, like they all have to be like this representation of what a man is. And like it even mentions here, and even previous readings that we've had, like there's so much like I feel like anxiety and like emotional pain that goes on because you're constantly putting on this front.
For the feminism part, I thought it was like really true when they were saying that multiple and contradictory definitions of feminism are going around, and that's why like there's so much confusion and like not a lot of like effort like for other people to understand the movement, because like how can you understand it if you're getting like all these different definitions that aren't true about it? I thought it was like interesting because when I was younger, like when I was in high school, the word feminism, we were like, oh, like we aren't, like, feminists because, like, we don't, like, hate men, like, blah, blah, blah. And, like, you think of it as, like, oh, if you're a feminist, like, you just hate men. But, like, when you actually, like, get into the movement, you understand that it's just for, like, equality. And I feel like there's all these other definitions going around to, like, keep the movement down. It's like, oh, well, blah, blah, you just blah, blah. And it's just another way to keep women below men.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting that it said, like, it is a process by which we move from seeing ourselves as objects to acting as subjects. And so, kind of like what you were saying, like, I think it matters, like instead of just being stuck with, like, how society is, like, still functioning, like, we need to actually start participating and, like, start trying to have equality. But, I even think they mentioned it as, like, it's definitely a struggle to do that. And it's not going to be easy, but it's definitely needed. And, like, more conversations are definitely, like, I feel like that definitely would help.
Okay.
Is there anything left on the Rothenberg?
No.
We're good?
I'm good.
Cool.
I'm good now.
I'm satisfied.
Cool.
Are we on codes then?
Yeah, I think we're going to go to quotes, page 96 through 110.
Okay.
I thought the quote I liked was when he said, "I'm sorry that I cannot make it okay. I'm sorry that I cannot save you, but I'm not that sorry." And I feel like that was really interesting to read just because he was, like, saying it because, like, people of color have constantly been going through that and know how to deal with it. But if, like, the roles ever reversed or if, like, the government or police ever started treating white people the way that they've treated people of color for so long, that they wouldn't know how to deal with it. So that in a certain sense, like, he's not sorry that his son's going through this because at least he knows how to deal with it and he knows what's going on in the world, more so than being, like, blind to it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was an interesting statement to make.
Yeah, Coates is he's very philosophical to me. Some of it's a little bit confusing, but the quote that stood out to me, it was on page... It was on page 96. I said, or he wrote, "The fact of history is that black people have not, probably no people have ever liberated themselves strictly through their own efforts. In every great change in the lives of African Americans, we see the hand of events that were beyond our individual control." So this, for our class, is just kind of related. For me, I related it to our conversation about being allies, and that no people have ever liberated themselves by themselves. So that's kind of where counselors, where we come into play, and kind of pushing for these changes because it can't be done on their own.
Yeah.
I wrote in big letters, "That's why we are allies," next to the quote.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. In the beginning, he mentions, like, "I'm ashamed of how I acted that day, ashamed of endangering your body. I'm ashamed that I made an error, knowing that our errors always cost us more." So that kind of, I think, like, brings in our conversations about, like, how previous conversations that we talked about, how, you know, like having those mistakes, like, could cost them their life, can cost so much more, and just because the color of their skin. And it's, I don't know, that just, it really stood out to me because, like, I feel like he explains that black people have to be careful to be, like, whatever move they make, like, whatever decision that they do, they have to be mindful about the consequences that could happen.
Yeah, he always says they have to try twice as hard or be twice as good.
Right. I thought it was also interesting that he mentions like his little metaphor about how there was someone down in the valley because a mountain is not a mountain if there's nothing below. So like he was saying, you and I are the below. So we're below, like he and his son or the black people are below, and that's been true since 1776 to today. Like there is no them without you. So it's like one of those, you kind of have to have the other to distinguish who you are. So I feel like that's why white people tend to, like, I'm better than you. Does that make sense? I don't know how else better to explain it, but like they need the other to distinguish who they are. Does that make sense? Yeah. I thought that was interesting how he worded it. Yeah.
I wrote down how he said, and then they would have to determine how to build their suburbs on something other than human bones, how to angle their jails towards something other than a human stockyard, how to erect a democracy independent of cannibalism. Kind of just going back to our our in-class discussion about how people say that America is like our land when like we were not the first people here. We murdered other people basically to claim this land, and just how disrespectful it is to say like this is our turf when we're standing on other people. We talked about that last class.
That's even like when for Saturday class we had the color of fear, and like one of the men mentioned like you had to step on other people just to be where you are as like a white person. So like especially to hear like standing on or human bones and cannibalism, like that's just to have that power over someone, that's just so wrong. And it obviously needs to change, but I don't know, I think that just brings in how important it is for us to be an ally and to help.
Yeah.
I have one more thing to talk about. So he was talking about how the entire narrative of this country argues against the truth of who you are, and then like went on to explain it in a story that the Civil War has been glossed over in education and popular culture, and that representations of the war and its reasons seem obscured. And I kind of like see that because when we were going over it in middle school, I don't remember how much of it actually focused on like slaves during that time period. It was just like the battles, and I feel like that was like a main part that they like just kind of like either rush through or skip over because they don't want to take the time to like focus on such like a dark time in America's history, and they kind of want to like ignore or like put it like in the back of their minds that it happened, so they don't have to like actually think about what we did to people of color. And then he was talking about how when they visited the battlefields, it felt like they were nosy accountants conducting an audit, and that someone was trying to hide the books from them. So I just thought that was like really powerful, and I've never actually like thought about how it's been glossed over.
I actually talk about it a lot in my journal reflections, just because, especially with Rothenberg, just reading all like the truth, like I just like, it's frustrating because it's like we have not been, I have not been taught that, and it's like I feel like I'm like learning America's actual true history instead of like what like the people that have made the textbooks wanted us to hear, which are probably white people that just want their version of what America is instead of like the reality. So yeah, I thought that was it's frustrating because it's like I thought I understood, but clearly I don't, and like that's why I think for me I'm trying to educate myself more.
I feel like I know even less about what we've done to like Native American people.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like what we do it for the missions project in like 4th or 5th grade, but and even that, it's like all positive like things. Like they don't like have us focus on like the like terrible things we
Right.
did to them. And I mean, I remember reading like the Cherokee Trail of Tears and stuff like that, and that was, I think, the one book
Yeah.
that we like ever read in school that showed like a negative depiction of what America's done to people. Like all the other books, I don't know, like, and I don't even like remember exactly how what like detail they gave in the book. I just remember like a couple things from it that were bad. So like I needed to go like reread it again. But do you guys want to go to the article?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. This one was also about classism and working with people in poverty. Let's see.
I think it was nice to provide like what Smith meant about like poor. So like it was defined as people who've been poor their whole lives, whose parents were poor, and have a high probability of remaining poor. And like I wrote down like it's a social and economic condition. So like, I think that was nice to understand like what the targeted group like they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think it's really sad to think that like therapists would have like unrealistic expectations for their clients and like thinking that they won't benefit from therapy. And I think I wrote down like the distancing from the poor. I thought that was really interesting because like this, if you're distancing, wow, can't speak, distancing, there we go, ourselves from the poor, then like it could be seen as, oh, they're just disappearing, or oh, it's not, does that make sense?
And like there's some of the people who could benefit the most from our services.
Especially about like loneliness. That was one thing that was mentioned. Like the quote, like, nobody knows me, miss. Like that really stood out to me.
Yeah, I like how she kind of walked through each of the different stereotypes about working with these like people in I can't talk either. People living in poverty.
Yeah.
We kind of already touched on it, but I think, what was the first one? The first one was that she wrote, poor people are forced to contend with so many problems that they don't need a psychologist's help. They need basic resources first.
Yeah.
And I like how she also, after each stereotype, like, said that there was just a hint of truth in each one, but, that's not the overall picture.
Yeah.
Like, because to an extent, she explained that, yes, generally their first, like, concerns are probably going to be focused on, like, if someone is living without shelter, they're going to need to find shelter before they can, like, explore any further. And I liked how she talked about the example of the man who was first homeless, and she said they spent a lot of time having conversations about finding, like, temporary rent assistance for him. And she said when they did, it brought immediate relief, and then, later into their therapy, he was able to talk about his relationships and the sense of loneliness that he felt. Yeah. So, just like everybody else, they can explore their own issues going on too,
I like the third one that she wrote down, that working in a poor community takes away from the comfort of not knowing how poor people live. And I think that's just like ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Because like once you know how people, even in like your own community, are living that you didn't realize before, like how, like, I feel like you just want to know that type of information. Because I mean, like, I don't want to say it's guilt, but it is like guilt, because it's like you could do something, but like, what are you actually gonna do? And then, I mean, I'm just thinking for like overall people who are like in lower class, in like the lower class, or like working class or blue collar, like in that time when they were saying that they can't benefit from it because they wouldn't know like how to have those conversations. I would think more so people would like, I don't understand why they would think that way in the first place, but also like how do they pay for it? Like it just seems like such a like going to therapy if you are that poor and like spending your money on that, like it's not a necessity at the time. Mm-hmm. So like if they're going, it's obviously like a real problem they want to work on. Mm-hmm. And I feel like to overlook that is like how could you not like see it and not like if they're willing to spend this money that they don't have getting your services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that made me think about how like there's they mentioned like poor people are dragged down by emotional and family devastation, educational failures, criminal convictions, domestic violence, losing or have lost hope, meaning, and purpose. Like if you like you mentioned, like someone like who has that going on would definitely want to go to therapy just to if you lost hope. Like does that make sense? Like you would spend the money if you can, or like do what you can. But it's hard when you have all of those factors weighing down on you, and plus like previous conversations we've had, like where you are worried about like your basic necessities.
Yeah. And then I was talking, and it said that 52% of lower class patients indicated wanting to talk about their feelings and exploring earlier experiences to solve their problems through like insight-oriented therapy, when like therapists at that time didn't even think they had the ability to talk about those types of emotions or things that were going on inside of them. But it's like proven that over half of them were going to therapy for that exact reason.
Let's see. I also thought it was interesting. I hadn't really thought about it before. I think it was the second, I don't know which number it was, but she wrote, psychologist interventions are diminished in significance because of the caliber of problems poor clients deal with. And I wrote down a quote. She said, even when they have made the best possible use of psychological services, poor clients frequently depart the office to resume a life of sobering obstacles that a psychologist cannot touch. I just thought that was like a really powerful quote. And I mean, generally, if people in this profession, they desire to help people. So how do you not, I feel like you think as a therapist, like, I should be helping these people. What can I do? But realistically, how much can you do? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, as far as outside of the therapeutic relationship that you have with them and acting as a support system, I would imagine it's kind of stressful as a counselor to feel almost helpless with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why, like, what they can do, at least in the office, like, try to be like more flexible. I think they mentioned that in here and like in other readings that we've had actually today, future. And I think it's also important to give people living with poverty just the opportunity that you would any other individual. That they mentioned that, and like just making sure to have like a safe space for them.
Yeah.
So like just they are still a person at the end of the day too. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when they were talking about how they like call it distancing themselves from the poor, and how one of the people in this article is the one who described it as distancing from the poor and presented psychology as the only one of many fields and institutions that devalue and discount or otherwise fail to acknowledge the poor. And I was like, it should be like the complete opposite.
Right.
It should be one of the few that do. So I just thought that was kind of interesting to hear. And then how some multicultural specialists exclude class intentionally, warning that the concepts of multiculturalism can become diluted to the point of uselessness if the definition is expanded to include more than race and ethnicity. I feel like if you're excluding, like, where, like, that's just, like, a part of it. Like, if, like, how could you not include, like, to me, I think it would be, like, an injustice to exclude class, because that's defining a lot of the person, what they're going through, what they have gone through, and what their, like, living situation's like. So how can you just X that whole factor out and be like, oh, no, I don't want to talk about that.
Of a person's context. Yeah, I agree with that. Kind of going back to what you said about how ignorance is bliss, and we no longer have the comfort of not knowing how poor people live when you work with people from these communities. And that just kind of made me realize, like, how important self-care is. And I know we've talked a little bit about like secondary trauma, as far as hearing people's really traumatic stories and like actually seeing it. Just kind of like you said about wanting to like unknow that information.
I completely agree with that, and I do appreciate that, like it was talked about, like, what to do next, like, so that's why it's so important, like, in our graduate programs that we're actually learning about this now, because I know, I mean, there probably are other graduate programs that don't address this, so, like, it's special for us to know and be aware of. I feel like that's going to allow us to be better advocates and better, like, effective therapists or counselors when we're out in the field. So I think it's nice that like it was addressed, like, oh, this needs to be implemented, and which that's what we're doing now. Like, we're having these conversations and being mindful. Yeah. All right. Is there anything else?
I think we covered it all.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. Bye.
I got the computer.